Hey fellow skeptics, Lester the Skeptic Tank. Going to do a quick run through of how to add partitions that don't get mounted upon boot up. There may be specific reasons for why that would happen, deliberate, indeliberate. Doesn't matter. To start, you're going to use a command a lot of DOS users from back in the day would remember, fdisk. At least that's what I've rolled with. I know there's the fdisk and the other graphical tools. I just go with what's been tried and true. So one thing I can do, I need to add a partition. So in this case, I just tried to shoot a video or record a video on my desktop. But wait, I didn't have the partition there for me to use, especially when I rebooted my machine. I saw to it that my main partition holding a lot of my personal settings, documents, pictures, and what have you, that was misidentified for some reason. Tends to happen, but it makes it very prudent and necessary to get at least to start a means of identifying what you have at your disposal when it comes to partitions. So what you can do is fdisk, and then you can use the switch L, which is to list everything. So fdisk, just to break it down, is just fixed disk. And whether we're talking disks you have internally installed or externally installed, whether that's by USB, so like a flash drive would be considered a fixed disk of some sort. So the main thing that you need to be aware of is what kind of disks or storage devices, because disk is kind of a misnomer nowadays with a lot of devices being solid state, and you're seeing in my listing NVMe, that's another type of media that's non-platter based. So you can see right away that I have an idea of what I set up each storage device or devices, how I want them set up when I mount them. So to start, I want my big drive, which is holding a lot of my media files. I have a gaming NVMe, which I just installed some months ago, I think either in the beginning of this year or some part of last year. So the one I need to get and mount as my main space is the 837 gigabyte drive you see right there, which is listed as SDB2. So when you look at how Linux breaks down storage devices, if it's not using what is traditional IDE or integrated drive electronics, which not many motherboards or not many computers use. They've all moved on to what is known as serial ATA, and that's pretty standard for a lot of consumer-based motherboards. I run with what's called a serial attached SCSI add-on card. And as you can tell, the way it's been identified by Slackware Linux when you talk, or Linux in general, when you talk about the NVMEs, you can see how the mount structure is laid out. So dev is where all of the devices are mounted, whether that's a processor. I think I mentioned that in my setup video as well. So because I have an array of serial attached SCSI storage devices, I have a few solid states. The 837 gigabyte drive in question is still platter based, just because I do know that when failure is calculated for a solid state, or in this case non-disk based, it's based off read and write accumulated over time, whether that's gigabytes or terabytes or whatever the next unit is. That's something I had wrestled with over the decade. Do I want to move on to solid state? And in some ways, I'm thankful I did. I mean, disk performance is so much better. So without further ado, I need to go in and mount. And the SDB, by the way, that's the core device. That's the core storage device. Now the SDB 1, 2, that's the partition breakdown depending on how you want to partition a single storage device. So I have it such that there are 2 partitions set up, and I think this was during the setup, or at least when I set it up at the time. So SDB 1 and 2, these are Microsoft created partitions at the time. So of course Microsoft will create one partition for reserved space and then the main partition, which is 2. So knowing this, I need to go in and I don't need to do anything with the drive. I don't need to repartition it. Now I need to mount it. Now that I've identified what I want to mount, I'm going to mount it to what I've historically mounted it to, a folder. And you could do, and the nice thing about Linux and storage management is that you don't have to always use that folder as your mount point. You can make it something else. You can make a folder and name it something more specific than storage. And you can mount that specific drive to any specific folder you want. That way you can clearly identify the files or the class of files that you want to store in this specific partition. So I'm going to do that. Now I want to mount, because I didn't do it yet, and you can tell based on how things are structured, like you can tell that SDC 1 and 2, again, these were Microsoft generated partitions, just because during the setup process it's initialized, and then when you initialize it, it'll go through its setup process. And I wanted to, there isn't much reason to aimlessly partition drives because of the newer systems out there allowing greater capacities. Now it's more of a matter of strategy with respect to backing up. So, because if you do have an array of partitions, you might end up leapfrogging things when you don't need to leapfrog. So what I'm going to do is mount my NVMe 1 . Let me see which one that is. Yep, it's going to be NV1. And then I'm going to choose gaming. Okay, that's the next one. Next one I'm going to do is dev dc2, and I'm going to put that to, did I win? Yeah, that's what I'm going to do. Because that one is my NTFS partition. You can tell just basically the identification of the type that is Microsoft Basic Data. So it always helps to run a simple fdisk and then a -L and get a lay of the land, get a view of the land of the overall drives you have. As you can tell, the very bottom item, the NVMe 0N1, that pertains to my dual boot. You can tell based on the EFI, that's what Linux and Windows, at least the way I set up my Linux to use the EFI system, along with the system itself. So I set aside 300 gigabytes for Linux itself. I don't know how much I really need. I just know it needs a lot less than Windows. You can kind of see that based on how big my Microsoft partition is. It's 566 gigabytes, and depending on the kind of programs you install, maybe some games, that space gets eaten up pretty well. Alright, I hope this opens your eyes about Linux storage management, how you go about adding different partitions of storage devices, especially when you don't load those to upon boot. Now, if I wanted to do that, what I would use, Nano is just the text editing within the command line as far as my understanding goes, but if I wanted to change that, if I wanted that to always be mounted, I would go into this and edit any of these. So you can see what kind of partitions these are, and you can tell based on this listing, this is the expectation that these specific drives or devices, that's where I want them mounted. And so if I want that mounted off the bat, I would just go, and it won't matter, at least I don't think it will, where in the listing it falls. But if I wanted to play it safe, I probably would add my line underneath the NVMe. But I'm okay with that. Maybe I don't need my Windows or my gaming partitions available upon boot. I'll add them as I go. And before I forget, I'm going to exit out. And I'm going to load a module. And this was a switch that enables me to detect my two disk drives. I have externally connected my 4K drive that I recently installed, as well as my my DVD drive, where I run my Windows or my boot up CDs. All right, fellow skeptics, thanks again for your time. As always, I as much as I would love subscriptions, I appreciate comments more. Particularly because, like I said, it helps drive what I deliver to you. And don't hesitate. Don't hesitate to leave a comment. If you have a question, I'll do my best to answer it. And if I don't know the answer, I'll let you know. I'll say, hey, don't know, but I'll definitely look it up. All right. Check you all later. Have a good one, guys.